You're welcome to this webinar, the second webinar on the Water and Food Nexus stream. Our presentations will start at exactly 2. In the meantime, make yourself comfortable and introduce yourself to the rest of the participants through the chat feature. Type your name, affiliation, and country in the chat feature to introduce yourself as we wait for the presentations to start. Thank you.
그래서 좀 많이 먹는 약을 그렇게 따라가면 뭐 특히 그렇게 안 맞고 뭐 바로 뭐 플레이는 바꾼다래 약간
I think Amara is the host. I don't know.
አሁን ይሰማሃል? እኔ ያወራሁት አልተሰማህም? እንትንህን ቼክ አድርግ። ማይክህን ቼክ አድርግ። I'm talking right now. Check your mic. Okay. እሺ።
Dr. Amara, I think it is time. So we may request you to take over from us and enable your camera and speak to the participants.
For joining us, we know you have your daily commitment and compromising that and joining just to contribute and listen to this interesting webinar encouraged us really. Thank you for that. So Nile Basin Initiatives, in collaboration with the government of Ethiopia, is organizing a series of webinars in the 6th Nile Basin Development Forum. This session, this part of the webinar, the International Water Management is co-hosting under the theme of rethinking regional investment in Nile Basin. The Science Policy Practice Dialogue is organized to bring together Nile Basin Initiative with stakeholders from Nile Basin countries and around the world. The goal of the Nile Basin Development Forum is to enhance transformation process in the project that will contribute to Nile Basin Initiative's shared vision to achieve sustainable socio-economic development through equitable utilization of and the benefit from the common Nile Basin water resources. The theme of the Nile Basin Development Forum: Water Resources Management, Environment and Wetland, Energy, Water, Energy, Food Nexus, Adaptation to Climate Change, and Transboundary Water Governance. As you can see, it's quite broad theme addressing a number of issues that's currently priority for the Nile Basin. Nile Basin is one of the most critical transboundary water basin in Africa, with the river Nile playing crucial role and the resources for most of the economic and the social activity for the countries in Eastern and Northern Africa. This section, the session of today, is about water for food and the nutritional security under the stream, unlocking the potential of rain-fed system. I think for today's session we have two keynote speakers. The first one is Dr. Anton Erle, who is an environment and development professional. Anton leads teams in water management and development internationally, facilitating the interaction between government, civil society, and the private sector, and other stakeholders for risk reduction for investment in climate resilient development. The second keynote speaker is myself. To brief you a bit on my background, I'm from International Water Management Institute based in Ethiopia, and I'm trained in nutrient cycling, soil fertility management, and bioclimatology. Sorry to miss, Dr. Anton Erle is from SIWI, Stockholm Water International. I did also my PhD in this area, have been working in water sector, natural resource management sector, water productivity for the last close to 30 years or so. My title is Challenge of Rain-Fed System and the Need to Nurture Rain-Fed Irrigation Continuing for Better Ecosystem Services. The first keynote speaker, Dr. Anton, will give us highlight why rain-fed system matters in sub-Saharan Africa and particularly Nile Basin. And following that, we'll have a presenter, each of them 10 minutes presentation. The first one is Dr. Sahir Ayad, Institute for Technology and Resource Management in Tropics and Tropics, Holland, University of Applied Science in Germany, and the Institute of Crop Science and Resource Conservation, University of Bonn in Germany. Dr. Sahir has been working over 10 years in international working experience on wide range of water-related research and the consultancy. Sahir is currently working as a research associate and lecturer at Cologne University of Applied Science, where he also obtained his MSc degree in integrated water resource management. Further, Sahir is a doctoral research at the University of Bonn. His research interests include water and land resource management, socio-ecological systems, sustainable development, and geoinformatics. He will give us a presentation on the water and land demand of agricultural practice in Eastern Nile Basin, the status and the future opportunities. The next presenter is Dr. Walde Makria from International Water Management Institute based in Ethiopia. His background is soil science, restoration ecology, and landscape management. He will present an example of business model for technology enhancing ecosystem service in rain-fed agricultural landscape, which is a key approach to rain-fed water management. Third, we'll have Dr. John Ogwang. He is executive officer and consulting partner at Eastland Service in Uganda. His key role is design, management, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of development projects with focus on agricultural and rural livelihood, water and the environment, governance, gender. He is going to give us a presentation on investment option for enhancing the productivity of rain-fed agriculture. The last but not the least presenter is Dr. Fisu Magos from the International Water Management Institute based in Ethiopia. He's an economist by background and did a number of focused research on environmental economics, institutional policy, socio-economic studies. He is going to present exploring payment for ecosystem services as a framework to incentivize implementation of practices that enhances rain-fed irrigation continuum. So the presenters have 10 minutes. The keynote speakers have 15 minutes. With this, in the interest of time, I would like to open up the session. And the first, I will call upon Dr. Anton Arle to give his keynote speech. Thanks a lot. Anton, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amari. I really appreciate that introduction. Let me just get my screen shared over here. And then I can get the presentation going. Great. Thank you very much, Amari. Yes, as you introduced, I'm Anton Earl from CIWI's Africa Regional Center based in Pretoria in South Africa. And I'll introduce to you a Pan-African initiative that CIWI has been working on the last few years, and which we're actually implementing a component of in the Zambezi Basin at the moment. And I think there could be some commonalities with the situation in the Nile, but of course I think all of you are real Nile experts, so I'll let you draw those sort of conclusions. So transforming investments in African rain-fed agriculture is really trying to look at ways that you can get established business models for getting the necessary finance into supporting rain-fed agriculture on the continent. As you're probably familiar, there's around 170 million small-scale farmers in Africa. 85%, it's estimated, are entirely reliant on rain-fed systems. So this is a real issue, and one that can have a huge impact at scale, impact in terms of climate change resilience, impact of food security, impacts on job creation and rural livelihood opportunities in general. So that's why it's a serious issue. For CIWI, it's also a water management issue. We are a water institute, so obviously we're interested in the water aspects. And if you think of these roughly 170 million small-scale farmers, what they are doing on their individual patches of land at scale has a huge impact on catchment management. So if we are finding ways of supporting them to reduce soil erosion, to reduce sedimentation of water bodies, to improve recharge of aquifers, you're actually having a huge water management impact. So as such, we want to view these small-scale farmers as your frontline water managers. These are the people that really have their hands on the ground and are doing a lot to influence water management. And yet they're actually not being compensated for this water management role of theirs. So trying to find the numbers in this regard can sometimes be a bit difficult, but there's been some good studies done by the World Bank on the Pan-African level, which estimates that the rain-fed agricultural land accounts for around close to 95% of all farmed land on the continent. And as I mentioned, it's about 85% of the farmers, and they are really entirely dependent on the timing of local rainfall. And more when we are speaking with farmers in different parts of Africa, you know, the consistent message that comes out is this one of what was possible to do 10 years ago or 20 years ago is not possible today. We used to be able to get maybe 2 crops a year on a rain-fed system, and now we are lucky if we're getting 1 crop a year. And it's this variability that seems to be increasing. So these really are people that are hyper exposed to the impacts of climate change. And of course, this really impacts on their ability to generate a living from agriculture. We are seeing increases in inequality. So those who are able to access irrigation, well, that's good for them and they can do well out of that. And that's an important contributor to economic development, job creation. So obviously it plays an important role. But what we find is that in most systems that we are looking at, is that it's the relatively better off farmers that are able to access irrigation. And typically these are also men, because access to irrigation is also contingent to some form of access to land, formal access to land. And this is usually also a strong gender dimension. So men tend to have better access to irrigation. So what we are saying is that investing in enhanced rain-fed agriculture, and I keep on stressing this term enhanced, because we are not saying that people must continue just being dependent on rainfall, but we want to enhance this through really allowing more adaptation to climate change. And there's a range of different technologies that can be used for this. We are not promoting any one technology for enhancing rain-fed agriculture. So some of it is very much on local scale. Some of it is more at a catchment scale. So it encompasses activities right from sort of your in-soil type of approaches like conservation tillage to local micro-catchment approaches like terracing or bunding, to macro catchment approaches where you might look at communities developing sand dams and so forth. But essentially what they all have in common is that they are trying to maximize the retention of local sources of rainwater. So essentially slowing down the movement of that rainwater through the landscape. And typically what they need is small amounts of investment in capital costs. So to actually set them up doesn't cost you too much in terms of the capital material that you're going to be needing to invest. But where your investment, of course, comes is in capacity building and your agricultural extension services that have to be maintained over time. But if done right, this improvement in your rain-fed systems, of course, can reduce water and nutrient losses, increased yield, and limit soil erosion. And it's important to also point out, when you look at increased yield, your yield might go up from, for a typical crop, maybe from 1 or 2 tons a hectare, your increase might only be 1 ton a hectare, so representing maybe a 50 to 100% increase. However, your reliability of yield also increases largely. So your variation between years decreases. So that's an important aspect to remember as well. The framework that CIWI has developed for the Tiara initiative, transforming investments into African rain-fed agriculture, is a framework that looks at multiple inputs, but also multiple benefits. So at your very heart of it is your water management happening at farm level. So this is seeing that farmer as your frontline water manager. So the decisions that she takes at farm level really have that impact further on at catchment level. And I mentioned some of these approaches that we've looked at. So in the cost-benefit analysis that we've been looking at and developing, and there's a range of these publications on our website, which I can send you the link to, but we've included looking at conservation agriculture, climate-smart agriculture, regenerative agriculture, rainwater harvesting, for instance, from rooftops, landscape management more broadly, soil health initiatives, and all of this being linked to rain-fed agriculture. So we use a variety of these terms, but essentially you need to make these investments at farm level to improve the way you're managing that local rainfall. Your second tier over there is your governance environment. So here, of course, you have to recognize that you need to have the right sort of policies in place. You need to have government coming to the fore, coming to the party and saying that we recognize investments in your rain-fed sector as being important, as being in a way also supportive of investments in irrigated agriculture. Because if you can protect your conservation of your catchment, you can also reduce sedimentation of dams that are built for irrigation, for instance. So you need to also foreground this. And that's a message that has to come strongly from governments in Africa calling for this investment. You also need to look at businesses. There's a range of different businesses that need to be supplying agricultural inputs across the value chain. So they need to also be able to say, well, can they then work with farming communities that are at relatively small scale individually, but if you add them up, it's a big business. We're talking 170 million small-scale farmers. So business opportunities across that value chain. Your development partners and financial institutions, they need to be looking at models for being able to invest in this sector. And again, it's an issue of lots of micro investments. So how do you scale this up? So we're in dialogue with some of these development finance institutions that are very keen to look at ways that you can find investments. So whether it's around microfinance and loans, or small grant payments, or it could even be around payment for ecosystem services. One of the panelists coming up on this session later is speaking about PES as a way of actually developing this. And we see that as a very strong potential way of furthering investments in rain-fed agriculture. And then, of course, working with these farmer communities themselves and recognizing the role that they play as catchment managers. So all of this needs to be done at the governance level. And then on your final tier out there, you look at the broader economy. So on farm level, of course, I spoke about the efficiency gains that you could be having through investing in better soil management, but also improved resilience to your climatic changes and variability. And of course, just increased yields, but also increased resilience to changes. So that's really at your farm level. Off farm, I've already mentioned the value chains that are necessary, but there's good potential economic rationale for investing in these value chains. So supplying improved seed varieties, for instance, improved fertilizers that can be invested into the field. And of course, if a farmer has too high a risk of crops failing because of rains not arriving and no ways of improving moisture in the soil, they are unlikely to want to invest in these kind of improved soil seed varieties, improved fertilizers, and so forth. And likewise, once they've produced the crop, they need to be able to get it to market. So you need this value chain. And then, of course, looking at that macro level, you've got great opportunities over here. Once you can improve local level food production, you are moving people out of a subsistence realm where no one really wants to find themselves in. So the term subsistence farmer is not something that people choose, it's that they don't have an option when you talk to people. So as soon as they are producing more than pure subsistence, they're also very quickly able to start investing in their own family health, in education, nutrition. So increases in employment, increases especially for youth opportunities that you might see in the rural areas. So you're also playing a role in making rural livelihoods more attractive to the youth and reducing that pressure of moving to the urban areas. And of course, in the long run, of course, you can reduce your need for food imports. We did one study that we commissioned looking at the amount that's spent every year on food imports into Africa on staple foods, and it's billions of dollars. And so if you can reverse that flow and have some of that money remaining within Africa, invested in improved local agricultural production, you've already scored a major gain. Briefly, some of the barriers that we've identified. There's a range of different barriers, but looking at the lack of policies, regulations, and incentives, it's difficult to go and get a loan, for instance, on the back of rain-fed agriculture and farming practices. So that leads to poor access to finance, the various markets and technologies that are needed. There's a lot out there that is being promoted in terms of technologies, and they're very successful at individual trial level. We've seen any number of pilot initiatives and trials and so forth. I mean, so many across the continent. And they're wonderful when you look at them individually, but they are somehow not finding their way into the policy framework and becoming part of policy where governments are really promoting them. Of course, we see the remoteness of some of the locations as a challenge. Just getting the necessary capacity building and knowledge out there, that is a challenge. But often I've also had to stress here that one is building on indigenous traditional ways of farming. So it's not a thing of reinventing the wheel in most cases. In most cases, just building on what is already there and maybe supplying a limited amount of capital investment. The high climate risk and vulnerability. So, even with investments in improving rain-fed agriculture, you might find there are some climatic extremes that you're not going to be able to overcome. So keep expectations at an appropriate level as well. There's also a perception that we find both within the policy-making field as well as within the farming community that rain-fed agriculture is somehow outdated method of farming. And that needs to be overcome. You know, we've actually seen some very good, very large-scale commercial farms in different parts of Africa that have swung back to rain-fed agriculture and done so very successfully on the back of reducing their input costs, so reducing fuel costs, for instance, reducing fertilizer use, and that they actually find that they're quite successful like that. The lack of understanding is at all levels, from farm level right through to your very upper level, policy level, leading to a lack of political leadership coming out saying that this is something that could actually be working. So these are the sort of barriers where we need to be paying attention and shifting the needle. Tiara, just very briefly, if we focus on a few of these multiple interconnected challenges linked to food and water insecurity, population growth, of course, putting a pressure on existing resources, poverty, meaning there's a lack of potential for financial investment, all linked with climate change, we start seeing that this lack of knowledge and acceptance of rain-fed agriculture is an area where there's something of a low-hanging fruit. By raising awareness and giving a degree of capacity building, you can immediately start getting people more engaged in this. Then we also aim to really work on the limited leadership and the ineffective policies that are supporting this. And thirdly, looking at the issue of lack of access to finance. So we would like to really, on a continental scale, see enhanced rain-fed agriculture scaled up across Africa to really make a difference. And this, of course, will call for local, national, regional level partnerships. We need to establish credible business cases. So many of the good examples we've seen of good rain-fed agriculture systems are very focused on looking at the outputs, but not very much of looking at the inputs. So when you start asking them, well, can you give me a cost to benefit ratio, for instance, you find it's difficult to get those numbers. So we need to get the data out there. There's a need for that. And on the back of that, establish a credible business case. The enabling environment needs to be conducive to investors coming in and saying that we can see a business case over here and invest in farmers that are attempting to go large-scale rain-fed agriculture. And then really look at investment vehicles that you might put together, meso-level investment vehicles that can serve as a sort of an intermediary between your farm scale and your larger scale requirements of various financial institutions, which obviously would look at much higher institutions. And here we identify regional economic communities as possibly playing a role, and river basin organizations as playing a role over there as meso-level investment vehicles. And then, of course, the gains, outcomes, and impacts, of course, cut across a variety of the SDGs that you're all probably familiar with, not just SDG 6, of course. Very briefly, the Zambezi initiative that we are working on at the moment, the Zambezi Watercourse, the largest watercourse in southern Africa, comprised of 8 member states, and they are increasingly dependent on rain-fed agriculture. It's estimated that 65 to 70% of the population across the states are engaged in small-scale rain-fed agriculture. And yet you see low levels of agricultural productivity really leading to entrenched poverty in much of the basin and a lot of vulnerability to climatic change. So tackling poverty and regenerating these rural economies in the Zambezi has become something getting more and more political attention. So ZAMCOM, the Basin-wide Commission, has come up with a strategic plan. So the Zambezi strategic plan, which runs until 2040, an ambitious plan with 4 main components. First, around infrastructure development. Second one about livelihood support. The third around natural resources conservation. And the fourth around your water management functions. So they've identified these 4 strategic areas of work. And interestingly, when you look at the livelihood support program that ZAMCOM has now adopted as official policy for the organization, and all 8 member states have approved this, I must stress, there's a strong focus also on improving smallholder rain-fed agriculture, because it's seen as holding very quick wins for improving your soil moisture capture, for reducing soil erosion across the catchment, and for improving agricultural production in the catchment. So you can really see ways that this can play a water management function, but also by supporting livelihoods in the catchment. So we are really working in partnership with Zamcom and various other partners to try and come up with a large-scale program that's linked to climate change, responding to climate change, which will have as a component of it, a strong component on rain-fed agriculture, trying to target financing from the GEF, GCF, and other sources in the long run. Conclusions, essentially that enhancing rain-fed agriculture requires these investments in not just your soil conservation practices, but a whole range of different value chain components, looking at your inputs, your markets, your access to the markets, and so forth. But that these investments in water management are really an entry point to unlocking the potential in rain-fed agriculture and leading to long-term climatic resilience. The finance for large-scale and long-term capacity building and support at farm level is what is really needed. And again, I can't stress the role over here for river basin organizations, which can take this on board, not just as a poverty eradication issue, which of course it does have a role to play there, but also as a water management issue. So there's definitely that this falls within the mandate of any river basin organization I know of on the continent. And you really need to look at rain-fed agriculture if you want to build this local resilience to climatic change. But what is needed are the high-level policies, such as what I've demonstrated now at Zamcom, that can really call for integration across a variety of sectors. This is not just your water sector here, you need your agriculture sector to come on board, environment, a range of other sectors that can really support an approach like this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dr. Anton. This is a very, very comprehensive and interesting insight in terms of unlocking the potential of rain-fed system. I think the point you put forward in terms of the importance of rain-fed system to the majority of population in Africa and more specifically also in Nile Basin, and the vulnerability of this system to climate change and enhancing investment in this area are something really that's very, very crucial that every state, every expertise have to consider and think about. And also the framework, probably I encourage you if you can share the framework, link to that framework. I feel it is an important resource. And the barriers, the policy, finance, knowledge, and the investment, and the perception of outdated methods and the political leadership, all those, how this hampers the whole efforts of investment in rain-fed agriculture is also an important topics really that you brought in. I think the pathway is also the pathway from the current reality, how we reach the outcome and impact, and how that could be linked to SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And an example from Zambezi. Those are, I think, some very clear and comprehensive ideas. Thanks for that. The conclusions are really very interesting policy ideas, which I think the organizer will take this forward. Thanks, Dr. Anton. We talk later on. You are a panelist. We talk later during the panel discussion. Now I think the floor is mine. I have to give my presentation on nurturing rain-fed irrigation continuum in Nile Basin for better ecosystem services. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen. Put it in full mode.
Yes. Thanks a lot. So let me start with an argument. Dr. Anton clearly mentioned the importance of a rain-fed system for me, there are a number of good reasons that also we have to consider irrigation system as an integral part of the rainfed system. Where are the link? How would be, that link nurturing and, complementing, synergizing those activities between the two systems would help us to close the food security gaps in Nile Basin would be a special interest to me. This is in a very simplified way the content of my talk. Irrigation rain-fed continuum. This is really conceptually what do we mean when we say irrigation rain-fed continuum. This is not something new that's been there for decades. I think UMI's innovation. And why rain-fed irrigation continuum in Nile Basin? I think this is something that we have to understand before we really look at what are the options, what are the technology, how would that impact livelihood, food security issues. So then I'll move to how can we nurture this continuum for better ecosystem services. I will give you a couple of approaches and also a couple of examples of technologies. And then I will conclude my presentation with key messages. I think if I start that blue water, which we use for irrigation, or water that we use in our tap, water that we use for our livestock is not coming from river. It's not coming from lake, including the groundwater. It comes from the watershed. So watershed, if you take it the larger one, the major part, if you take the proportion of what has been mentioned, 90% plus of Africa, probably applies also for many of upstream areas in Nile Basin, is a rain-fed system. Rain-fed and the irrigation system at landscape or watershed scale are interdependent units. They are not standalone. There are material flow, including water and sediment. There are energy flows between the two systems. In a way, if we manage them, this flow could be complementary. A case study here in part of Nile Basin on the figure here shows, upland cultivation here, for example, where there is food security issues, during the planting, harvesting time of the upland cultivated areas with the wetland, the lowland irrigated areas. How do the food security issue complement each other? Because of different seasons of practice, different time of practice, the harvesting time, that comes, that brings in food security issue in two communities or the same community producing crop in upland and the lowland areas would be benefited. I think we can't see the rain-fed and irrigation system are two separate components. So upland rain-fed system conservation management influences valley bottom and the groundwater supply. All the technologies, the options, the approach the previous speaker put, I think forward will influence the irrigation system. On-site and soil moisture, supplementary irrigation, and reduction in erosion in rain-fed system, and off-site, of course, it improves base flow of rivers and the groundwater, which could be used for expansion of irrigation or supplementary irrigation. This is one way. The other way is also on the plot and farms of the rain-fed system itself, there could be irrigation or irrigation plot could be during the wet season used for rain-fed system. So there are, complementarity in terms of moisture and nutrient input, residue management, labor, all those sort of things. So I think we have to acknowledge that. Look at this just simple figure. I'm showing across landscape from upland areas to the valley bottom lowland areas how the rain-fed purely rain-fed area in upstream where you need to put conservation, supplementary irrigation, and water harvesting. And also as you go down, a bit of groundwater based irrigation, and finally the valley bottom as a fully irrigation system. So the water interconnects the livelihood that lives in upstream area and again with those in living in downstream area. So the system is hydrologically, socially, and with other biophysical components very, very, very much interconnected. So investment in landscape, watershed management approach, like green water management and the blue water productivity in downstream areas, virtual water transfer from irrigation to rain-fed, and vice versa. Example, planting material during dry season, multiplication of seeds on irrigation areas, wheat seed, for example, from irrigation for rain-fed season wheat planting in upland areas, animal feed transfer during dry and wet season. And I think those are critical things. And also for this to happen, I think transforming institutional environment is very essential. So why rain-fed irrigation continuum in Nile Basin? The thing is something already clearly mentioned by a previous speaker. Climate change is an issue of critical challenge. If you look at this figure, percent annual rainfall anomaly, and also very poor annual rainfall distribution. This means rain-fed based livelihood and the piecemeal approach to development makes a production wobbling. Look at the figure, how the GDP across years for areas dependent in rainfall, for example, in Ethiopia is wobbling along with the rainfall amount and the distribution. This very, very clearly shows the scarcer the rainfall, the more challenging would be the life and the livelihood in many upstream areas. And the yield gap as a very probably, let me call it recent, 2016 Van Itersum et al. Work indicated there is huge yield gaps in rain-fed system. The point is, how can we nurture this? It ranges between 1 ton to 11 tons per hectare. The East African and Nile Basin countries, are in many of the places. You can see them in red areas for certain crops, in greener areas for some other crops. So how can we nurture this to feed our people, to reduce food demand supply gaps in the basin? This is something really justifying why rain-fed irrigation continuum in Nile Basin is very important. This figure shows 2010 food self-sufficiency ratio for 5 main cereals jointly by region in the countries. You can see the East African, West African countries. Take the East African for the case of Nile Basin, and also for countries, specific countries. And this is under rain-fed condition. If you look at Eastern Africa, it is below 1. Self-sufficiency ratio is less than 1. East Africa and then Ethiopia, it is already less than 1 under rain-fed condition. So projected 2015 food self-sufficiency ratio for 5 main cereals jointly scenarios and the rain-fed intensification. In this case, exactly what Dr. Anton is mentioning, rain-fed intensification would improve the current food security level. But this finding confirms that intensifying rain-fed system won't help us to meet the food demand of many countries, including the East African, probably for this specific case. And of course, when the irrigation come into that part, you can see some countries, exceeding the line 1 food self-sufficiency ratio, meaning in the region, if there are countries that exceeds the food self-sufficiency ratio, there is opportunity for virtual water trade, transfer of food from one country into another country in the basin or outside the basin. The bottom line here is irrigation and rain-fed intensification are a must for food security. But the question is how we nurture those connectivities. So this is an example of approach, a system approach. For example, as you can see it here, we have the crop, we have the livestock, we have our trees, different crops, different trees, different livestock species. The whole dynamics of food production productivity is, managing that interaction with their environment, of course. And there is management system and there is democratic force. All those has to be taken into account as a food system generally, rather than, a sort of piecemeal approach to help us, for one thing, meet our livelihood expectation. For the other thing, there is always a feedback loops into the system to minimize negative feedback loops into the environment, so that the coming generation will also enjoy their right to access to food and clean water. Of course, water allocation is critical. We said smallholder harvesting in rainfall system. If we cannot optimize that, if we cannot make that on basis of evidence, probably we deplete water source for downstream valley bottoms irrigation. So that has to be always taken into account, both for ecosystem services and also issue of equity. The value chain approach, clearly mentioned by Dr. Anton, thanks for that. This is critical. For me, what I like to display here is we can look at value chain from two key components. One is following the value chain nodes. For example, in this aspect on your right hand side, there is input and the services. And there is then the production, there is harvesting, process, and the marketing. In Africa, in Nile Basin context, I think we need what we call value chain accelerators. Those are capacity building, could be formal, and coaching, knowledge management, and the promotion, research, and the documentation. Those are, two complementary components that helps us to enhance the value chain approach to the whole rain-fed and irrigation, not as such rain-fed or irrigation per se. So another examples of approach is adaptive management. The major problem we have in our agricultural practice, be it irrigation or rain-fed, is we don't collect data. Probably that's a critically missing part. And also systematic decision-making, structured decision-making that, as you can see it on the right-hand figure, defining problem, identifying objective, developing alternatives, the scenarios, which probably involve here a trade-off management, trade-off understanding, elucidating consequences, what it does, and looking at how best to manage, mitigate that negative impact, and implement management actions. And at the same time, starting off, data collection, a longer term, shorter term data, evaluation, and learning from that. Learning the trend is how our intervention impacted the life and livelihood, how intervention impacted, adjacent system, as I said, the irrigation and rainfall. Your intervention affects your, in rainfall affects your irrigation and vice versa. How is that, link complemented and synergized so that we get a very successful, sustainable landscape management? I think this is very critical. There's a paper, if you search with my name or with the title of this paper, you will find an interesting recent article in this area. If you look at examples of technology, well, this is an example. Quite wide varieties of technology are currently implemented, failed, successful across the Nile Basin countries. Agroforestry integration of trees in agricultural landscape. This is not something new, but we have to always, advocate or collect information, learn, adjust, and readjust as we go forward. This is very critical. And the productive use and the optimization of water and inputs, I think this is very critical. Because if you look at this figure, if you consider 5,000 meter cube per hectare of water applied here at the, on the horizontal axis, and follow that red line, you see the lowest yield gain is traditional variety and low input. When you go up, the highest yield, around 6,000 kilogram per hectare is obtained. Is a combination of high yielding varieties, high inputs, and also with the same amount of water. Imagine with 5,000 meter cube of water, the variety of yield level we can give depending on our management. This is something that we have to internalize. Integrating varieties, fertilizer and the water optimization is critical to achieve water productivity in Nile Basin generally. And the irrigation benchmarking, obviously this is something probably we have to learn from own schemes. Within a single schemes, there are varieties of yield level depending on farmers' investment, farmers level of knowledge and resource, and that offers a good entry point for others to learn from those kind of well-performing individuals and farmers. It could be also at scheme levels. It could be at between countries, if particularly for Nile Basin countries. This would be interesting. An example of technology which I'm just trying to display here is our work with Bahar Dar University here in Ethiopia. We tested breaking hard pan as a result of continuous cultivation and the migration of clay down and building a pan that won't be easily penetrated by water infiltrating, and therefore high runoff, low infiltration, and crops very vulnerable for dry spell. And there are 5 treatments here. One is biological treatment with, I think, cowpea, deep-rooted crop. And another one is bercantilage, locally made plow, which is deeper than the conventional tillage. And deep tillage is hand digging. And the no tillage is a zero tillage, and the conventional tillage is the current tillage. There is very clear differences between those different level of different treatments in terms of the degree of erosion, in terms of infiltration, in terms of crop performance. So if you do this, actually over long term, you impact the downstream groundwater availability for your irrigation, and also the base flow for streams downstream, which could be, which could enhance irrigation. This is example of penetration resistance under different depths. This is infiltration millimeter per hour for different technologies. As you can see, deep tillage and biotechnology are the one that showed significant improvement in infiltration. And the runoff and the soil losses, as you can see again, deep tillage had and biotechnology. No, Berkan plow showed the highest, the soil losses and the lost runoff compared to others, which means we can conserve soil on spot and also reduce sediment flow and silting up water bodies and downstream, so that affecting the irrigation system sustainable water supply. So those kind of technologies are an example of really what we can consider to improve the rainfed system, so that the rainfed system gets sustainable water flow and sustainable, storage without, with minimum sedimentation. And this is the root length again. This is deep tillage and Berkan tillage and the biotechnology. The three on the right-hand side are where the root growth was very deeper. This means also can, tolerate a short dry spell and survive really unnecessary, infrequent, untimely rainfall or extended dry season. And the biomass yield, as you can see, these are all related with sufficiently available water. I think with this slide, I would like to show you the current activity, how we are trying to operationalize the rain-fed irrigation continuum in part of Ethiopia. We have 12 irrigation schemes working with government. In rain-fed areas in upstream of the irrigation scheme, we do risk analysis, drought, flood, erosion works, and bring in technologies to mitigate that. And we do also alternative water sourcing, which include rainwater harvesting and groundwater use. Introduction of climate resilient germplasm, like through soil conservation measures. And we do also land degradation surveillance techniques and capacity building. All those what we did in rain-fed system has capacity building component, coaching and mentoring components with government local district expertise. On irrigation system, we put hydro sediment monitoring system, a weather station which could serve both the rain-fed and the irrigation scheduling, tools and the capacity building, rural resource center like a nursery site managed by use, where you can produce your seedling and create access to planting material for upstream rain-fed system. So this way, complementarity and the synergy between the two systems really increases the chance of achieving our food security in Nile Basin generally. I think that brings my slide to the key message I want to share with you. Majority of population are dependent on rain-fed system. This is also confirmed by the first speaker. Rain-fed system is vulnerable to climate change. We have seen this, how the GDP of an example from Ethiopia is wobbling with rain-fed rainfall amount. And the rain-fed alone cannot meet the food demand by 2015. I think this is also we showed from the research findings of our colleagues in CIMIT. Rain-fed and irrigation systems are interconnected, and therefore the livelihood therein. And the synergies and the complementarities of rain-fed and irrigation system is issue of critical importance in developing water resource for sustainable use. I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. I think with this, I'll move to the next speakers. We'll start with Dr. Sayer. Dr. Sayer, who is from Bonn, Germany. Sayer is currently working as a research associate and a lecturer at Cologne University of Applied Science, where he also obtained MSc degree in integrated water resource management. Further, Sayer is a doctoral research at University of Bonn. His research interests include water and land resource management, social ecological system, sustainable development, and the geoinformatics. You have 10 minutes, Sayer, and the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much. I would like to just say that I don't really have the doctoral degree yet, but thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, that's fine. You will be there very soon.
Thank you. Crossing my fingers. So can you see my fingers? Sorry, can you see my screen? Can someone confirm if you can see my screen clearly?
Yeah, we can see. It's very, very clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone, and thanks for the organizers also off and on the scene. I'm happy today to share with you some findings from our recently completed work. It's important to mention that this work is done jointly with my colleague, Mohammed Khalifa. I think already some of you know him. What we are trying to look at here is the Eastern Nile Basin and the providing future outlook on the agricultural practices by 2050. Just a quick reminder on our major limitations or challenges we are facing right now globally: growth, population growth, climate change, urbanization, economic development. One can also add migration. And these problems exist very much in the three countries we're addressing here. But also, we have two additional problems, which are the transboundary conflict and the underperforming agricultural schemes. I think most of us already know that agriculture is a dominating livelihood in these three countries, and water is definitely limited and a scarce resource. Looking at the per capita share of blue water currently, it's already scarce in Egypt and Sudan and stressed in Ethiopia. By 2050, the three countries are more or less around the absolute scarcity situation. So what did we want to do here by this research? We wanted to look at the 2050 and see the potential deficit in the water and land resources used for agriculture. How did we go there? We looked at three different population fertility variants. This means three different time series of population forecasts, low, medium, and high. For each of these fertility variants, we had one extensification scenario, so business as usual. There we assume clearing more lands for agricultural using the current efficiency, and three intensification scenarios. So we are implying higher efficiency for water and land use. What we didn't look at, or our assumptions, were that the current export and imports, but also the dietary pattern, will remain unchanged until 2050. So we chose two main indicators as variables for our scenarios: the water footprint and the yield gap. And we used entirely open access data sets using remote sensing, FAO statistics, but also work from previous scholars. For the water footprint, we analyzed two other indicators, so the crop water productivity and the water use efficiency. And by there, we used some statistical analysis to estimate the potential improvements in the water footprint. And with the yield gap, we looked at also the average, attainable, and potential yield. So average and attainable yield, we looked at the last 25 years and extracted the average and the highest yields. But also for the potential yields, we looked at other literature. So people who have done some field experiments or modeled the crop growth. From there, we were able to identify both the improvements, potential improvements in the water footprint and in the yield. And we did that for 25 crops in Egypt, 24 in Ethiopia, and 14 in Sudan, representing more than 95% of all crops in the three countries. Here what we find out that, for example, looking at the water footprint in Egypt, the potential of improvement is not really big. We have between 4 and 10% potential improvements in the water footprint. This percentage is a bit higher in Sudan, so it ranges between 13 and 30. Same applies for Ethiopia, between 10 and 25%. But looking at the yield then, if we want to close from 50 to 75% of the existing yield gap, this means that we can increase the current yield values by 10 to 15% in Egypt, 50 to 100% in Sudan, 30 to 60% in Ethiopia. And here we can see the big room of improvements. So these are the 4 scenarios after we know now the potential improvements that we can actually realize. We develop these scenarios. So you would see that the horizontal one is a business as usual. Vertical one implies potential improvements, and 2 and 3 are also applying higher improvements. It's important to see here that realizing 10 and 20 and 30% improvements in the water footprint is very ambitious, especially in the case of Egypt. If we remember the last slide, we saw that the potential improvements between 4 and 10 are possible. We still would try to see the potential improvements if we apply 20 and 30%. There we can see the water demand by 2050. So the dashed line represents the current water resources available for croplands in the 3 countries. The different scenarios, each of these scenarios have 3 different fertility variants by the blue and red dashes, but also the X signs. So you would see that Egypt is really gonna face a severe challenge there. 3 out of the 4 scenarios are completely unfeasible, especially that this is only the agricultural water demand. We don't account here for industrial or even domestic uses, which are like 20 billion cubic meters in Egypt. In Sudan and Ethiopia, there is a better chances of fulfilling future demands. Looking at any vertical scenario, approximately any vertical scenario would be sufficient to meet the future demand. So if you look closely at this figure, you would find out that the potential solutions for the 3 countries, either to move the dashed line, so the renewable water resources up, increasing it, or to optimize the use, either by looking at the different population growth fertility variant and try to control that, or use higher efficient technologies for water and land management. So you would see also here are the deficits, and these deficits, I personally would see them as a potential or a hidden conflict between the 3 countries. Who is gonna apply these potential improvements? These are costs associated with closing these deficits. I really think that knowing who's gonna pay for that, who can pay for that, would solve a problem. But until now, I think we don't know it and we don't talk about it. The case with the land is also not so exactly different than the water. You would see the same deficits. It's even worse that, for example, in Egypt here, there is no potential to meet the land demand by 2050. The country needs, in best cases, to double the current agricultural areas, which is very challenging. Also, Sudan, even it has like a big reserve of arable land. It can't continue as a business as usual. Even the vertical one wouldn't be sufficient. Both Sudan and Ethiopia have to apply improvements to move for vertical 2 and vertical 3. Here again, we see the deficits, and even though you can see that the deficit in Sudan and Ethiopia is bigger, in fact, the percentage to increase the current cultivated area is higher in Egypt still. So national implications are pretty much what everyone can know, but we still recommend increase the importing crops in Egypt, looking more at non-conventional water resources and integrated solutions on the field scale. For Sudan and Ethiopia, both countries have to apply better rainwater harvesting techniques, or actually invest more in that and apply better water and land management techniques, which were actually recently presented now by Amari. And but these are only until 2050. What after? Here we want to discuss the potential implications of the transboundary. We currently see the ongoing conflict, which is mainly driven by the resources sharing approach. But we here promote that we need to move to benefit sharing. Everyone says we need to move to benefit sharing. We repeat that with everyone. Why and how? Firstly, I would say that each country needs to really identify the potential competences it has, the merits for each country. So looking at Egypt, they know how to irrigate. Irrigation has very high productivity in Egypt than irrigation in most places around the world. So we have the irrigation experience, we have the advanced technology, we have the investing power, which could actually increase the productivity throughout the basin. Sudan has the most, the largest reserve of arable lands. And of course, Ethiopia has the great potential for hydropower and meat production. We should also keep in mind that currently Eritrea and South Sudan, maybe they don't use so much water, but in the future they want water. They want to develop as well. This is something we have always to think about. So our key actions and recommendations is to establish cooperation, but real cooperation based on these indicators. So looking at the yield gap in each country for each crop, the water footprint, transboundary cultivation, favorable trade agreements, which is also mentioned by Amari, the virtual water transfer between irrigation and rainfall. This is very important. Also, we need to invest and improve the data monitoring and sharing between the three countries. Last but not least, of course, looking at we need atmosphere of goodwill and the desire to achieve win-win solutions between the three countries. I will copy this link for our paper if you really want to know more findings about what we looked at. It's available until 3 more days from now for free access. Last but not least, I would like to share with you this very nice African proverb, which goes like that: if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sir. This is a very interesting insights on the basis of empirical evidence and scenario-based build, encouraging and advocating for collaboration, equity, working together. Without going much into detail, as this is already really substantiated points that were raised by Anton and myself. I thank you, Sire. And next, I would like to call upon the next speaker, Dr. Walde Makria from the International Water Management Institute based in Ethiopia. He's a soil scientist restoration ecologist, and landscape expertise by background. He's going to give us an example of a business model for technology enhancing ecosystem services in rain-fed agricultural landscape. Dr. Walde, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Amara, for the introduction, and I would like to welcome all to this webinar. So I will give you now. I will share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see. Can you make it on PowerPoint presentation mode?
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, I make it.
Yeah.
So I will give you just a brief presentation on business model scenarios and suitability, which is just for exclosures. It's one of the landscape restoration measure in Ethiopia. So as you know, land degradation is a struggle for Ethiopia and also just like many other African countries or globally. So several kind of conservation measures, that's land and water management practice, have been implemented in Ethiopia, both in highland and lowland. So one of these measures is an exclosure, which is just when you see the right side picture, the vegetated hillside represents an exclosure, and just below that is a cultivated land. So exclosures are simply communal areas which were traditionally open access, but where woodcutting, grazing, and other agricultural activities are now forbidden or strictly limited to promote restoration and natural regeneration. And this practice is increasing by 2% every year, just depending on the current estimates. And if this increment increases, 5 to 7 million hectares will be covered. It's estimated that like 5 to 7 million hectares will be covered by exclosures by early 2030. So exclosures are very important, mainly for restoring degraded landscapes and just improving soil properties, and also reducing runoff, increasing infiltration, mainly through improving soil organic carbon and soil structure, improving dry season flow, and harvesting of rainwater. And also it are very keen in increasing groundwater recharge. And exclosures are also very important, or able to support to diversify the livelihood of local communities in rural areas in Ethiopia, because we will see in a few minutes. But everything is not positive. There are also challenges. One of the challenges, exclosures constrain poor households and communities from continuing existing activities, because these exclosures are usually established on communal grazing land. So whenever we are establishing the exclosures for landscape restoration, we are taking land from communal land from local communities, which used to use like free grazing system. So we are shifting from free grazing to a cut and carry system. And there is also a loss or lack of short-term economic benefit. This is just true for all kind of long-term conservation approach. So there is really a loss or lack of short-term economic benefit. This is one of the challenge of exclosures. And also sometimes it aggravates degradation of remaining communal grazing land, because we are not reducing the number of livestock, but we are just reducing the size of communal grazing land, so that this may aggravate degradation of the remaining communal grazing land. So as part of an effort to address this challenge, or simply to balance immediate short-term economic loss at one hand with a long-term economic and environmental gains through establishing exclosures, we are just trying to develop a business model scenario or suitability for exclosures, because we need to balance the short-term economic loss and also the long-term environmental benefits. So this is just a business model scenario or suitability, which we have developed based on more than 10 years of research and development activities on exclosures and other land and water management practices. Our business model or an adapted business model scenarios have different components. The first thing starts with identification of revenue streams. We identified 3 revenue streams that can be integrated within exclosures. These are beekeeping, livestock fattening, and also cultivation of high-value crops such as fruits. Then we did suitability mapping, environmental suitability, including climate adaptation and mitigation, and institutional, regulatory, and policy context, financing mechanisms, and also we just investigated whether these revenue streams that can be integrated within exclosures can be economically viable or not. Under suitability mapping, what we did is how we investigated how exclosures are important in restoring degraded landscape, one thing. The other one is we investigated whether there is suitable areas for establishing exclosures in Ethiopia. And also we checked or investigated whether exclosures are suitable for practicing the 3 revenue streams, that's beekeeping, harvesting of fodder for livestock fattening, and also cultivation of high-value crops within exclosures. Under environmental suitability, what we did was just to investigate the relationship between the revenue streams and also ecosystem services. So in general, the revenue streams have a positive role in improving or maintaining ecosystem service. They are very keen for stabilizing fragile areas, increasing biodiversity, or increasing agricultural production. For example, when you integrate beekeeping into exclosures, it just increases agricultural production through facilitating pollination, increase food for human consumption, increase feed for livestock, and also this may help reducing pressure on natural resources. So the other one we looked at is institutional, regulatory, and policy context. In this regard, we investigated the policies, strategies, and proclamations of environmental management, agriculture, and sustainable development, formal and informal institutions for managing exclosures, and investment incentives. We have also looked at institutional context for potential revenue streams, governance of exclosures, and gender, and also stakeholder engagement strategies and relationship among the different stakeholders. So we looked at also source of financing and financing mechanisms. So the potential source of finance for the revenue generating activities considered in this business model include like NGOs, government agencies, and private enterprises. Maybe Amara, you should be muted. Yeah. NGOs, government agencies, and private enterprises. So this credit through revolving fund or subsidies we can support. The land degradation neutrality fund could be one option, and also the payment for a custom service could be an option for just supporting these kind of initiatives. So when you look at the feasibility of all the three revenue streams, the beekeeping, fattening, and the cultivation of high-value crops within exclosures, in general, all the three revenue streams, the identified revenue streams are economically viable, but there are some message which we should take home. And one of the things is, for example, the current practice is to provide less than 10 modern beehives for an enterprise, that means for a group of 5 individuals, landless youth or landless women. But with this, the payback periods will be 4 to 8 years, which doesn't attract the landless youth or the landless women to engage with these activities. So the number of beehives should be increased to 25. If we can do this, we reduce the payback periods just to 1 year, so that landless youth and women can be attracted and also willing to engage to this kind of activities. The same works for livestock fattening. For example, just which is our scenario with a 3-round production of sheep and oxen fattening program. So if we are going to attract the landless youth or landless women, the number of livestock fattened within a year should increase from 5 to 30, and for sheep, it should increase from 42 to 300. Otherwise, this will not attract the landless youth, just provided that there are other options or opportunities out there. The cultivation of these high-value crops, such as fruits, are also profitable, but the payback period varies from 2 to 10 years, and the project period varies from 5 to 40 years. What we can take from here is the longer a tree takes to reach maturity, it is a higher the opportunity cost, so maybe less attractive. But in general, if things are well planned and well structured and implemented, the 3 revenue streams are attractive and can be attractive, and also can the youth and the landless women can be willing to just do this kind of business, so that exclosures and other long-term conservation approach can be sustainable. Just to come up to conclusion, in general, landscape restoration through establishing exclosure is effective in improving both on-site, like improving soil properties and agricultural productivity, and also off-site effect of runoff or soil erosion, mainly reducing siltation of water infrastructures, so that this helps to sustainably manage agricultural landscapes. But 2 major actions are critical for the success of the business model approach for managing exclosures. These are actions that enhance the flow of revenue to smallholder farmers managing exclosures. That is mobilizing financial resource for purchasing inputs, and also it requires meaningful participation of local communities. And the other one is we need to implement actions that ensure the sustainability of small-scale business, example, regular follow-up and technical support, and also facilitating market opportunities in the value chains. So with this, I will end my presentations, and thank you for listening. Yeah, you are muted.
Thanks a lot. Really, this is very inspiring. You see the way we try to deep down, starting from overall picture, connecting system, then looking at scenario, then technologies with their business model. whether, because the ultimate, key measurement is economy, whether what we are doing gives sense in terms of financial viability. So thanks for giving us this insight. I think the most important thing I would like to underline what Dr. Walde tried to look at is exactly on sites. And the water that conserved through this system really impacts positively the downstream areas, therefore enable irrigation. If you look at additional benefit that comes through this conservation measure, I'm sure the cost benefit analysis value would be completely very, very attractive. Thanks a lot. With this brief information, I would like to move to the next speaker, Dr. John Ogwang. Are you there, John? John? Dr. John? Yeah, probably with the interest of time, if he's not around, I would rather continue to the next presenter, Dr. Fisum Hagos. Are you there, Dr. Fisum?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Dr. Fisum is from International Water Management Institute based in Ethiopia. He's economist by background, by training, did a number of focused research on environmental economics, institution policy, and the socio-economic studies. Today, he will share his experience really how payment for ecosystem services as a framework to incentivize implementation of practices that enhance rain-fed irrigation continuum. Dr. Fisum, the floor is yours. We have 10 minutes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Amara. Good afternoon.
We can't hear you, Fisum.
You can?
Can you make it a bit louder? Something is wrong.
No, I don't know. What is it?
Yeah, now better.
Okay. What we want to explore in this work is,
shall I change your speaker? Shall I come and change your speaker? I can't hear you still clearly.
please. Yes.
Participants, our host is trying to help the next presenter to be able to be heard. Let's just give them a minute to sort that out.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you now. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. What this work wants to do is basically to look at whether...
Share your screen, Fisum, share your screen.
Share. Mm. It's shared now.
We can see you now. We can see your slide. Make it on PowerPoint presentation mode.
Yeah. Sorry for the inconvenience. I think the main goal of the exercise is what institutional innovations like PES could enhance rainfed irrigation continuum. This is basically a continuation of the presentation, which I'm already. As we know very well,
the
environmental
display settings so that we remove the two screens.
Can you go to display setting, Fisum? Display setting.
Where is?
Go up right up above the introduction.
Mm.
Okay, I will come.
Mm. Yeah, sir.
No. No, Stiziga. Here, sir. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
No. Okay. Mm.
Go ahead.
Okay. Let me repeat again what I said. The main goal of this presentation is to look at whether an institutional innovations like PES would serve to enhance the rain-fed irrigation continuum. This is a continuation of the discussion that Amara had. We can't and we should not see rain-fed and irrigation separately. As many of us know, land degradation is pervasive in many developing countries. This is more so in Ethiopia, where population grows, land scarcity, and unreliable or undue farming practices and land use has contributed to land degradation. Land degradation has on-site and off-site effects. on-site effects, which mainly revolves around the decrease in fertility and productivity. Off-site effects are the effect of sedimentation on water infrastructure downstream. As we know, the responses towards elevating land degradation in Ethiopia has been focused on mass mobilization, food for work schemes, basically focusing on productive safety net programs and individual efforts. Although there are few success stories, the effort overall have been not very successful. And one of the main reasons is the lack of incentives, community and individual incentives for undertaking sustainable land rehabilitation. And PS has been introduced as a new paradigm where upstream and downstream individuals, users, and communities will be involved in sharing the costs and benefits related to land rehabilitation. There are a few examples of on-site and off-site effects. There has been a lot of work going on quantifying the on-site effect of land degradation, but I will basically cite the work by Ercosa, which was done in 2015 in the Blue Nile, where they reported that because of land degradation, there is a loss of $220 and $150 per hectare due to loss of nitrogen and phosphorus. In Koga, which is a large scheme in Nile Basin, which is part of the Blue Nile Basin, sedimentation decreases the reservoir capacity in the last 4 years. And when we go to Sudan, although there are various works, we focus on citing Bashar and Khalifa, 2009, where they indicate that Rosaris Reservoir on the Blue Nile has lost like 40% of its storage capacity due to sedimentation. In the southeast of the country, by looking at the hydropower station called Malkawakano, we reported that like nearly 1 million meter cube of the dam is filled with sediments annually, amounting to 0.15% of the life storage. And in 2016, like 22 million meter cube of life storage capacity of the dam has been lost because of sediment, resulting to 8.5 million kilowatt hour energy loss. The same thing with Kokadam, which is located in the central part of Ethiopia on the Awash Basin. The average annual sedimentation rate is 12 million meter cube. And after 40 years, 494 million meter cube was deposited in the reservoir, indicating that 128 million kilowatt hour energy was lost because of sedimentation. So the objective is basically to understand or to illustrate whether or how PS enhances a rainfall irrigation continuum using two case studies, one on the Blue Nile and the other on the Bear Valley ecoregion. The main hypothesis of this work is that poorly managed rainfall agriculture affects local productivity, sediment removal, and redeposition in the downstream irrigation. We followed two approaches, which is continued valuation method and choice experiment, which is a family of state preference approach in valuation econometrics. And when it comes to the results, like 65% of the households showed a positive willingness in cash, disaggregated into 56% of the upstream and 70% of the downstream in Koga Gumara watershed. The mean willing to pay is about 12%, and 12 USD per year per household for the upstream, and 15% 15 USD per year per household for the downstream households. In a cash-constrained environment, labor could be an important ingredient in expressing willingness to pay. As you can see in this study as well, 97% in the upstream and 98% in the downstream do have a positive willingness to pay of contributing labor. In terms of numbers, the mean willingness to pay of 38% days for the upstream and 48% days per year per household for the downstream community. Interestingly, downstream communities are willing to contribute, which is to compensate upstream farmers. They express by their willingness to pay. From the Bear, we also find the same similar results. where mainland communities compensating surplus is about 87%. When we imagine that the interventions do have minimum impact scenarios, it rises to $120. And in the higher scenario, it goes to 145 USD. The lowland respondents, their mean willingness to pay is $42 US in the lower scenario, $75 in the middle impact scenario, and 113 in the higher impact scenario. In terms of key message, PS-based rehabilitation is a good basis for increasing rain-fed productivity and reducing low performance of irrigation, ensuring rain-fed irrigation continuum. Another important message is the mean willingness to pay fails far short of covering estimation costs, and full-fledged user finance PS scheme may not be feasible, thus requiring user and state co-financing. This is, in other words, means that in a context when the private sector cannot play an important role, we should go for a PS scheme which links user and state co-financing. And the final conclusion is PS basically enhances the value of water. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fisum. Really, your presentation helped us from the beginning of where we started, the importance of rain-fed system, and where we tried to, nurture the link between rain-fed and irrigation, and then the technology, the business model, and finally, when you came in with the payment for ecosystem service as incentive mechanism to ensure that farmers invest in land and water management to help this whole ecosystem to function healthily, brings us, I think, to end of the whole presentation. That's a very beautiful insight, and also very well linked with what Sir mentioned as benefit sharing as a conclusion of his model. I think unless Dr. John Ogwang came back, this will bring us to end of the presentations. Dr. John, are you there? John? So I don't think John is there. I think with this, I conclude, I close this presentation sessions. Then the next session will be the panel discussion. Our panelists, myself and Dr. Anton. Probably, Sir, would you join us? And yeah, these three of us. And if you have still question, you can always forward to Dr. Fisum and Dr. Walde, please. both gentlemen try to reply any question relevant to you live. So I will leave the floor to the moderator of the panel discussion, Dr. Johannes. Are you there, Dr. Johannes?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Dr. Amara. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear and loud.
Perfect. Okay. My name is Johannes Gebrasadik. Welcome again, everyone. I'll be facilitating this panel discussion. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by in the panel discussion, our host, Dr. Amara Helislase and Dr. Anton Earl will be joining us. Thank you very much, Dr. Amara. Thank you, Dr. Anton. I have prepared a few questions for us to get us going with the panel discussion. We have allotted a total of 15 minutes. I am aware that this is a very wide topic, but we will try and get the discussion focused on some questions forwarded by our participants. If I have the attention of Dr. Anton and Dr. Amara, I will get started with my questions without further ado. My first question goes to Dr. Anton. As it has been pointed out earlier by previous speakers, on the Nile Basin, again, with population growth, industrialization, there is this growing need of food production and expansion of agriculture. But as you may know, given the limited resource of the already stretched Nile River, the Nile Basin countries cannot manage all their future irrigation projects sustainably from the Nile water, or they have to seek alternative ways or water-saving measures such as intensification of rainfed agriculture. I guess talking about on regional scale, how can we really determine this appropriate level of intensification? I know this is $1 million question, but in broader terms, can you talk about what are the approaches or the criteria, if you will, that could be used to let us determine this threshold of rain-fed versus irrigated agriculture? The economic benefit obviously is one of the determinant factor, but what are the other aspects that the countries need to look into, such as carbon footprint, resilience, ecology, and biodiversity, etc.?
Anton, are you there? Dr. Anton?
Yes, I'm happy to go forth. Should I start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, please.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. Yes, just also to correct for the record, I'm Mr. Anton Earl, not Dr. yet. But just to respond to that point, I think the key point I would like to make, and I think it's a point that Amari also made earlier, is that I would urge us to move away from this phrasing of it being rain-fed versus irrigation, and really see that we can embrace them as part of the spectrum, part of a continuum, and manage your water resources in that way, and recognize that good catchment management in terms of rain-fed agriculture equates to good catchment management in terms of irrigated agriculture, and the two support each other. So when you're actually looking at ways of developing your irrigated sector, you're immediately gaining by also making appropriate investments in improving a rain-fed agriculture sector. And I think this point has been made quite a few times also by the previous speaker. So try to have an integrated approach to a more rain-fed agriculture and more irrigated agriculture approach. That would be the first thing that I would say, is that we really could be pushing for and get some quick wins for that will actually help us over here as well. Secondly, I would also see that we could more explicitly link investments in rain-fed agriculture both to climate change resilience, so your adaptation, which I think we've spoken about quite a bit in this session, but also to climate change mitigation. there's a lot of evidence that shows that your improved soil management can actually have a climate change mitigatory effect as well. I think that's where a lot more work is really needed, especially in the Nile Basin. So you can start then saying, well, that opens up new sources of financing if you can link your investments in rain-fed agriculture to climate change mitigation actions. So those two things for me, just on the outset, would be really important points that I'd like to stress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anton, for that elaborated response, and I apologize for the level as well. But while I have you, I have another question for you, forwarded by one of our participants. His name is Everstow Mabdez. I apologize if I pronounced it incorrectly. Everstow is a senior researcher from UMI in Ghana. He asked it on the topic of policy. Anton, you have highlighted the importance of policy. Therefore, I think this question is on that. It says, could you comment on the existence of policies on the shelf which are not being applied right now, or how do you ensure that policies are implemented from your experience working in Africa? If you come across policies which are in place but are not being followed up on or being implemented, if you could comment a little bit on this. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I think that's an important question, because that always comes down to it. We advocate for the development and adoption of policy, but to what degree is this being implemented? I think, you know, we need to start at that continental scale and look at policies coming down from the African Union. And, you know, the African Union has a range of different policy instruments. It's committed itself to increasing agricultural production. And yet very little of that actually mentions the importance of rain-fed agriculture. So that'd be a good place to start, just in terms of policy development. But then we must remember, of course, that policy isn't implemented directly. I mean, policy essentially creates the space for other actors to come forward and launch initiatives. It's not purely government which is responsible for policy implementation. Of course, government is the prime driver for development and implementation. I recognize that. But we need to be looking at, as a development community active in this space, to say, well, once the policy is there, and government has certain tasks, of course, but does that open up the space for a variety of other actors? Civil society, the development finance institutions, private sector even, to start actually coming up with solutions, start trialing different approaches. And very often the answer is yes, you can actually be doing a lot, despite maybe the policy implementation not being optimal. So that's maybe the response I'd give at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anton. I think I'm going to go to Dr. Amara. I have one question forwarded from Dr. Wubalam, and I will read it out loud. Proven technology packages that enhance small-scale rain-fed agriculture, such as rainwater harvesting, topsoil/nutrient conservation, soil moisture retention, etc., have been out there for decades. Yet adoption is limited to make a difference. I consider the disconnect between research and extension work as a major problem. What can be done in the Nile Basin capacity to address this? Do you have any lessons from your experience that you can share with us in this aspect? Thank you, Dr. Amara.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Dr. Yohannes. Thanks, Dr. Ubalum, for raising this interesting question. Yes, I agree with the idea that there are promising technologies. There are experiences, of course, in many parts of Nile Basin countries in terms of really in situ or ex situ soil moisture or water management activities. Well, the reason why we fail could be multiple, but also I support the failure in the extension services across countries. Let me elaborate a little bit on the general background why it didn't work in some places, why it worked in few places, why it couldn't be auto-scaled. I think the critical point is soil and water conservation measures or water capturing, channeling to where and when it is needed is a huge investment, both in terms of finance and also knowledge. And the gestation period is longer, obviously, for many of irrigation schemes or water harvesting structure. It's not that immediately you get the return. For smallholder farmers, this is very critical. And they are struggling to feed their family and themselves on daily basis, not, they invest on 3-4 years period return. And from previous webinars on technologies and option for productive use of water to gain in food and nutritional security, one of the policy message across was ensuring smallholders' economic viability. I would like to link that message here. Are they economic viabilities, calculated or estimated as part of these technologies? For different technology now we call soil and water conservation, whatever. It is very rare case you find how on situ soil and soil moisture conservation impacts. What is the return for investment? It is very rare case really that research itself linked that practice with a business model. The second one is from recent work we did. Actually, there are so many trade-offs in pursuing this soil and water conservation measures across the upstream areas. Of course, conservation measures, moisture conservation measures could be also a relevant technology for downstream to mitigate evaporative loss from soil surface. The thing is, from soil conservation based water harvesting for micro supplementary irrigation, there are huge trade-offs, and those trade-offs never considered in technology analysis, technology testing. And even if people understand the trade-offs after they implemented and lost, really the question of data collection and learning from that, how to manage that trade-offs is not really a very common practices. I know many of the research findings or conservation measures, soil and water conservation measures, yields improved or incomes improved, but what is it looks like when you consider from a cost benefit point of view? What does it look like when you look at probably downstream within a micro scale? Maybe it brings waterlogging even for certain soil. And also technology contextualization is something I remember sometimes back where water harvesting for agroclimatic zone receiving about 2,000 millimeter rainfall per year was recommended. That is crazy, honestly. You don't have to do water harvesting if you get 6 months, 7 months rainfall in some parts. And in drier part, probably you have to promote those. Yeah, tailoring technologies to places, to agroecologies, to social system is, I think, very crucial. Saying this, I think data collection over time and looking at how that technology changed the livelihood, changed the biophysical environment, and learning from that, and the sharing, You see, there are three key elements: collecting, analyzing, understanding, learning from it, and sharing of that data. I think this is honestly speaking, this is missing in many countries. I think that's where we have to work. Adaptive management. On the paper I tried to show you, this is a recent 2020 fourth quarter application, which you can find if you like. I can share the link with you. So that's in brief what my response to your question, Dr. Johannes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amara. Those are really important points, and I'm glad that you brought them up. I think we are running out of time, but perhaps I have one more question for you, Dr. Amara. I think you've talked about this in your presentation, but we would like to hear more about these in a little bit more detail. So we have a few minutes, so could you dive into this linkage of rain-fed irrigation continuum with agricultural intensification towards if possible? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the point is, from the work I showed you, agricultural intensification plus irrigation, an important avenue for Nile Basin countries and other African countries to meet their food demand. This is one part. In fact, when we talk about intensification, there are many things. There are many things in it. There are, the whole agrochemical use. There are, herbicide, more fertilizer, and varieties, all those sort of things. This has, of course, unless it is very carefully monitored. Farmers capacitated, farmers well guided based on research. It has a negative consequences somewhere on site and of course off site, on biodiversity, on also longer term resilience to climate change and downstream water users. It affects the whole value water value, which is, as you remember, the theme of this year World Water Day. Valuing water at the source, valuing water infrastructure, the wetland and man-made infrastructure, and all those sort of things. I think intensification needs care. Intensification is also a platform that brings the rain-fed and irrigation together, and it brings up really that their interaction is not only the positive interaction, but also there are negative interaction between. While pursuing agricultural intensification, to bring it on a sustainable mode, I think careful monitoring of system is very crucial. Yeah, that's in brief what I would like to say. Thanks, Dr. Johannes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amara. Thank you, Mr. Anton. I think that's all the time that we have for this panel discussion. Thank you again for the participants and for the questions as well. I now hand it back to our host, Dr. Amara.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Johannes. Thanks, everyone. Really, this is amazing webinars, I would say. The key issue that emerged from the questions many people are posting on question and answer, and also, what we are hearing from the different presenters. It brought up really so interesting many policy topics. Just to recapitulate some of the key messages from the different keynote speaker and also the presenters. I think the first issue is that rain-fed system is an important food security avenue for our major part of Nile Basin, if you like. Of course, mainly the upstream areas. And investment in these areas, there are so many different models. I think technologies options and current problems, major challenge analysis was some of the things we heard. And following that, I think the argument brought up by me in relation to not to look at rainfall system as an isolated system. There is a connectivity between rainfall and irrigation at landscape and even bigger river basin scale is an important avenue just to reap another additional benefit by nurturing their, continuum, more water flow downstream and also less sediments, and at the same time increasing crop productivity, animal productivity in the rainfall system, and environmental safeguarding is something that we heard. And from the modeling exercise, the scenario, really looking at the scenario, somehow let me, in a simplified way, substantiated the two keynote speakers' presentation. That's quite interesting, and of course, those are empirical evidences, really, which the presenter concluded the need for collaboration, the need for benefit sharing. I think the presentation from Dr. Walde and also Dr. Fisum, more technology and the enabling environment for that matter. One is on technology. Technology, we need to look at really the benefits through integration, through individual technologies. What are the figures telling us? When, how many years does it get just for smallholder farmers to get back their money? That's what's lacking. And probably an incentive is needed. I think that's what we heard from Dr. Fisum, incentive for farmers to implement. And I see also some online chat. No, the framework on incentive mechanism is not yet agreed. This is an argument. I think we have to, we as experts, including the person who raised this question, has to, look at this, bring ideas, bring, concepts into the expertise dialogues across countries, across the Nile Basin countries, build, so that helps us to build trust and to collaborate. And it has to be there at some point. I think the thing is, as I tried to say, what are the cost benefits? Would downstream country, upstream country get benefited by supporting this intervention? Normally the choice method, experiment method, you have to clearly show the respondents to your interview that intervention brings benefits to him. Otherwise, it won't be evidence-based. Then you ask whether they go for it or not. They bid a certain amount of money for it or not. So I think that exercise has to continue. We have to continue discussing. We have to continue dialogue, evidence-based dialogue, technique-based dialogue, science-based dialogue. That brings us somewhere to where there is a win-win situation. I think that's what I have from my side, and probably unless there is anyone to intervene, I would like to take this opportunity for the rapporteurs and the moderators and all the presenters and the keynote speakers, and above all for participants. Really, we appreciate there are so much interesting questions that you put forward to us, which we will look at it and really try to consider as relevant into the whole document synthesis, which will follow once the webinar ends. With this, I close up this webinar. Don't forget on 15th, the same time, we'll have probably much more interesting topics on how irrigation water management benefits the whole Nile Basin, and what are the scenarios, what are the challenges, what are really the best water saving options at hand that we have to try. And don't miss that meeting. I thank you, and I close this webinar with this. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Amare. And